Welcome to the History Nerds Night Podcast. I'm your head nerd, Brendan. Thank you so much for being here. Today, Targeted Beirut by James M. Scott. If you are a fan of the podcast, he's been on twice before. He is now the leading author, third time's the charm, with his co-author, Jack Carr. Jack Carr, you've heard his name. I'm almost sure of it. He is a huge fiction writer. The Terminal List became a TV show with Chris Pratt. He is huge. And you never know. You hit record on these podcasts and you're like, what's this author going to be like? As soon as Jack got on and started talking, just humble guy, really excited about this. You'll hear how he and James really, it hits home how badly they want to make sure that they're doing right by the people that we lost in the 1983 Marine Barracks bombing. They put their heart and soul into this. They really cared about it. And I think it comes through in the podcast and definitely does in the book. So instead of talking about it, how about I shut up so you can hear it? Let's do it. And here we are with authors Jack Carr and James Scott, Targeted Beirut, the 1983 Marine Barracks bombing, and the untold origin story of the War on Terror. Jack, James, thanks so much for coming on.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us. Look at that right there. The hardcover has just arrived. So very excited to see this in hardcover because the galleys that we got earlier didn't have the photos in there. And it is stunning. I could not be more pleased with how this came out.
I'm a book addict, so I can't wait to actually get my hands on it. But let's talk about how this even started, right? Jack, Terminal List, a lot of people know you from your fiction. James, friend of the pod, you've been on twice before. I don't think I even need to tell anybody about it. James, how did this all start? How did you and Jack link up for this?
Jack actually reached out to me and had an idea for for this book, this exact book on Beirut, and had reached out and said, "Hey, I want to start a line of nonfiction books, and I want to team up with somebody who's a military historian to help out with the research and some of the interviews and things like that. And would you be willing to do it?" And hey, it's Jack Carr. Who wouldn't want to do that, right?
Oh man, that is just too cool. But the best part about it is that now we're such good friends. But at the time, I hadn't even watched an interview. Your website is fairly sparse when it comes to stuff like that. You can't just easily click on something to find an interview. So all I knew, James, from is the books. And I'm pointing back there because they're over there on the shelf. So all I knew was the work. And I didn't know if he was going to be really mean or crazy serious or I had no idea, but I loved the work. I was I respected that. And so when I got to that stage, I always knew I would do nonfiction at some point. And I got to this stage where I thought I had built up enough political capital with Simon & Schuster and enough of a readership on the fiction side of the house that I pitched it to Simon & Schuster, Emily Bessler Books. That's an imprint of Simon & Schuster, Atria. And so I wrote out about 3 pages worth of different terrorist events. Most of them, I think they were all from maybe end of World War II, let's say, to present day. And unfortunately, there are a lot. But I kept coming back to Beirut 1983 as this point that is so pivotal with the United States and our relationship with the Middle East in general. And so I kept coming back to that. My personal experience with Beirut 1983 is as a kid seeing that Newsweek and Time magazine on our dining room table, asking my parents questions, watching the 6 o'clock news, knowing even at that young age that I was going into the military. So I was fascinated with anything military, and I was a student of warfare even back then. And so I kept coming back to Beirut 1983. So I pitched it to Simon & Schuster, and then it came down to who do you want to work with on this? And there was only one name, and that was James Scott. And it was interesting in my first call when I was talking to Emily Bessler, my editor, on the phone about this. And she said, well, who's his agent or his editor? And so I had the books right there. And so I went to the latest one, and I went through, and I'm looking at the author's note or the acknowledgement section, and it thanks John Glessman. And she's like, what? And I was kind of oh yeah, that's her husband. And so we got linked up on a phone call, got to talk, hit it off, and essentially went right to work, off to the races.
It's such a small world in publishing too. It's I'm literally doing a book with Emily and one with her husband at the same time. And I'm juggling both. And then Jack's texting me pictures from their daughter's wedding in Greece and things like that. It's such a crazy small world that wow. We all know everybody and things like that. So really, really, really cool.
Well, Jack, I'm thrilled it worked out because, of course, James is known as being just one of the meanest authors out there.
I didn't know.
And it's gotten around the industry. I have to bring it up and kind of diffuse it, but I tell this whenever James's name to come up, just kind of for your own edification, this podcast exists for a significant amount because of James. one of the first people I ever talked to, and he was the one I was just going to transcribe it onto the blog. And James was like, so when's the podcast coming out? I said, oh, no, I was just going to. He goes, no, you need to do this. And he was most impressed by the fact that I had read the whole book.
Yeah.
That's how I did it.
Yeah. That helps. That certainly helps. But I guess it would have been helpful had I done more research ahead of time. But I kind of like, especially now, that I had just read the books and was just aware of the work. That's it. If I had the time, I was just busy with so many other projects and writing and Hollywood and all this other stuff that I probably should have looked up a few podcasts to see does he seem like a nice person, or is this going to be fun to work with, but no, none of that. So the first time I got a sense of who you were, James, was on that phone call that we had back when I was writing in a friend's house. I guess it's 2 books ago now. Everything's conflated so much because so much has happened. But writing in a friend's house, because I typically was writing in friends' houses because 3rd or 4th homes here in Park City, because wife, 3 kids, dog, chaos around here all the time. So getting uninterrupted time to write, that was available in other people's homes. So that's where I took that first call together.
Now, James, did you have any trepidation, right? Because Jack, he's exploded. Past few years, Wright's books are all over the place. As he just said, he's Hollywood Jack Carr now, right? Was there any trepidation from your side of things, right? Because great fiction writer, do you think, hey, this guy's going to come in and kind of say, this is how I want things? You know how those military folks can be. They just want it a very certain way. Was there any trepidation for you, or were you just kind of like, hey, let's see what happens with this?
Yeah, I think it was kind of let's just see what happens. When Jack reached out to me, so I had just watched the Eternalist series. I was blown away with it. I got my wife to watch it. Then I picked up the book and read the book because I was like, I just want to see what the source material is like. And you can't not get hooked on that, And so I plowed through the books and whatnot. And then I, of course, later fell in love with Ray Porter, who, by the way, he's such a phenomenal audiobook that it's like having a movie told to you, if anything, when Jack, that's why I say when Jack reached out, I knew exactly who he was. I knew his work. I'd just been reading it. It was very serendipitous. And so I was like, I think this is actually a great idea. And look, and I've been doing World War II for a long period of time. And, and I'm kind of wrapping up one of my sort of latter big projects now. And so the idea of kind of jumping into more modern period of history and a whole new realm, it's really exciting. Just like Jack and I are very similar in age. I remember when Beirut happened. I remember when Reagan got shot. Look, I wrote a letter to Reagan as a kid when he got shot, wishing him a speedy recovery. Literally, I remember doing that. I was 7 or 8 years old at the time, and my parents helping me with the typewriter. I remember this era. It was of our childhood. It's the opportunity to kind of jump in and do this. And also, it's we're on that weird cusp where it's gone from current events to history, but people haven't quite realized that yet. And so we're really kind of charting this new ground. And so when Jack and I first started talking about this, the first thing we did was said, all right, what other books have been done on this? And I was stunned. There was a book done in 1984 called The Root, and a great book done by Eric Hamill, who's a wonderful military historian. And he had done it literally like a piece of journalism in 1984 right afterwards. And since then, nothing. And it's because it's still so relatively recent that it hasn't kind of shifted from more of the current events to history. So it gave Jack and I this opportunity to jump in and really, just mine this space, the documents that have been declassified. We were able to get all the Marine Corps records and the Reagan Library. And then, of course, all the survivors' families and the survivors, they're all still young. I do a lot with World War II veterans. And, the young ones are 95, 96 at this point. A lot of the guys we're talking to aren't a whole lot older than we are, and they're texting you. They understand technology and, Zoom and things like that. And they're awesome guys. And Jack and I got to meet a lot of them throughout the course of this research. So it just was a really rich opportunity to kind of jump into a whole new area of history and kind of run with it. And that's been, I think, one of the most refreshing, exciting parts. What do you think, Jack?
Yeah. So first off, did Reagan or a staffer write you back when you were a kid?
I got this whole packet in the mail from the.
Yeah, they used to do that stuff.
Yeah, and I remember I went into school and did this big show and tell of I got probably a 20-page book on the White House and all this kind of stuff, and my mom still has that.
That's awesome.
And it's funny because when we were doing our research in the Reagan Library, they keep all these samples of letters that and I'm going through it. I was thinking, I wonder if somewhere in here's my letter.
It's somewhere. It's somewhere. They don't throw anything out. You know what I mean? That's all at that level. They are archiving everything.
James, I'm glad you said what you said because it was something that popped out to me. I remember this, but of course I was in the military. There's a lot of things that you know and you've heard of. But when I looked at it and saw that you were both writing this, I said, I know the absolute bare minimum about this. And Jack, for you, was that something that jumped out at you, that there was so much to kind of illuminate here that other people had done? So, because I know, James says this too, you don't want to write the same thing. You don't want to write the 30th biography of Churchill. Was that something that you looked at as well when you're picking this?
It was, and James put it a lot better when we talked about it. He articulated the exact specifics about how events are kind of re-examined historically. About every 20 years, there's a book that comes out that either re-examines because something else came to light, or the experience over the past 20 years has led to different conclusions, perhaps, or something along those lines. But generally speaking, but when I made that list and went back to Beirut 1983, so not only was it a seminal event for the country and then for me as a kid, but I also knew, because as you can see behind me, I have a lot of books here, especially on military history, that there wasn't that seminal work. I couldn't name the book to read on Beirut 1983. And it was such an important event. And so that was another thing that stood out. A lot of events in history, you can say, oh, you got to read this by so-and-so, or you got to read this by so-and-so, or this is kind of the foundational work. Yes, there are others, but read this first and then this one, or something along those lines. There's at least a conversation about it. There's essentially zero on this. And so that was a part of it. And then when I talked to James, he talked about how, there are these gaps essentially. You don't want to have the seminal book on historical event X here and then write the next one to come out the following fall or the next spring or something like that. But in this case, it was fertile ground for all of those reasons, and the recently declassified documents, and having survivors that are have enough time and distance between when the event happened and us sitting down to talk with them, that they can reflect on it. It's not going to somebody who served with someone who died in World War II or something like that, trying to get a story from a 97-year-old who's thinking back to 1944, 1945. You're talking to the actual people who were there. And then you're able to humanize it by talking to a widow or a son of someone who grew up with an empty seat at the dinner table.
Yeah, and I was going to, not only did we get such great interviews, so many of these guys had diaries, they had letters. They really had, like one of our best characters in the book. And I think for me, when going back and looking through it all, one of the most impactful characters is someone who didn't survive, but yet we had access to all his letters. And so through those letters, his story is able, in a lot of ways, you're able to resurrect his experience for readers. And so, the cooperation, a real shout out to all the Beirut vets. They were super excited to have their story told, to share their documents. Every time we did an interview with somebody, we'd say, hey, who should we talk to next? And you get a text message of all these contacts. It was like, call this person, call that person. It was just more and more and more. So, and then after Jack did the talk last year at the 40th anniversary of that reunion, and at that point we were almost done with the book. We had a draft of it. All these guys came up afterwards and were like, I'd love to talk to you about it. I've got all my letters too. And so, here we were at the end, like trying to shoehorn more information into the manuscript. And the key was to get as many voices in here as possible from as many different people, not just Beirut vets and survivors, but parents, children, things like that, because it's their book, it's their story. And we really felt very passionate about having that be the case.
Right out of the gate, James said, this is their story. Let's just get out of the way. This is what we want to do. We want to get out of the way of this thing. This isn't ours. This is theirs. And James, I don't know if you remember, maybe it was maybe a year and a couple months ago now, but you sent me one email that had a letter, and then it was a scan, and then a photo. It was like a Polaroid photo. Yeah. And I remember thinking, and it was of someone who didn't, I believe it was someone who didn't make it. And I remember thinking, gosh, if I'd seen this photo in October, November, December 1983, I would have looked at it and said, oh my gosh, look how old this guy was. And then now when I see it all these years later, I think, oh my gosh, look how young this person was. Look how young all these guys were that perished or had to deal with this event. They were so young.
Yeah, 18, 19 years old, a lot of them. So young.
Now, James, you have experience talking to World War II vets. Kind of going back to that is something that you've done before. Jack, did you have a lot of experience with that? And how did you feel interviewing people who, and I think especially for us vets ourselves, it can be nowadays, we know more about trauma. We know more about opening that part of it up. Was interviewing survivors and people who knew those who didn't make it, Was that tough for you at first? Did you kind of have to build up immunity to be able to power through?
Well, James is the master at this and did the lion's share of everything. I want to be clear about that. He's so good, as you can tell right here, just in a conversation. Like, he's a good guy. You know it right away. All of us have this sixth sense instinct that you make snap judgments on people based on very little information for a reason, because it used to keep you alive back in thousands of years ago. You had to have that instinct, otherwise you were dead. So you don't have to have that military background. You just have to be a good person. That comes across. And then now I'm an informed good person, James. Oh, I'm a military historian that has context to all of this, that is genuinely interested and wants to tell your story. So you're immediately building up trust because of what you've done in the past and then in how you're interacting. So I got to see James interact with all of these people and develop genuine friendships with them based on these interviews, because as you can tell, as you know, he's such a good person. So that was really cool for me to essentially be a witness to and learn from, because once that person trusts you, genuinely trusts you, it opens a whole new world that could easily be shut down with an early mistake or coming at something for doing something for the wrong reasons, and they're going to sense it, that sort of a thing. So it's really all about trust, and James is a master at it, and gets so much information, things that I would never even think to have asked or to follow up on, or can ask things in a way that is so sensitive, but ask the question where I might maybe be hesitant to ask something like that, where you can do it in such an appropriate way that I was just so impressed.
How big were the bar tabs? Did you have to write them off to the publishing company? Are you willing to talk about that?
You wait till we get back from book tour. We'll see how it after this is. Jack, you're too kind. Thank you, buddy. I really appreciate that.
It's all true.
It's been such a privilege on my part to work with you and work with the Beirut vets on this. So.
Oh my gosh, it's so humbling. It's like, it's such an honor. And like, I just talking about it gets me emotional, and I flip to a page or something to kind of remember something, or I read a chapter again or something like that. I get emotional reading it because it's, humanizing this event. I think it was so important because, these decisions are made way up here in the executive branch, and they filter all the way down to this 18-year-old kid who's weapon off safe, finger on trigger, watching maybe a vehicle approach a checkpoint that looks like it's either over, it's kind of sagging down, which means it might be laden with something, or it just has bad suspension. And that's the same way it is today, but that's the last decision maker in a chain that starts up with the president of the United States and filters down. Now you have this 18-year-old kid who's the final decision maker. And that hasn't changed from Beirut 1983. It was that way before Beirut 1983. And we see a lot of parallels to today as well. You see Abbey Gate in August of 2001. You have essentially those same service members put in a tactically disadvantageous position by senior level leadership. And what do we have? 13 military personnel killed, scores wounded. And what happens is those others run to the sound of the guns to save as many of their buddies as they can, to hold security, not knowing if there's another bomb coming next, helping wounded civilians. You see that at Abbey Gate. You saw that on 9/11, people running into buildings, firefighters running into buildings, first responders. And you saw that here. You saw people who survived this blast that are now digging through the rubble with their bare hands, with a K-bar knife, maybe with a shovel if they could find one, maybe with a crowbar if they could find one, but mostly with their bare hands, moving this rubble out of the way on a race against time to try to save those buried in this rubble. So it's humanizing that, I think, was one of the things that was important to me, so that senior level leaders can really realize and that there are effects to these decisions made in air-conditioned offices 3,000 miles away from the battlefield. And those will have multi-generational impacts. The guys that we got to meet in the course of doing this book are still dealing, some with the physical, others with the emotional trauma of this day, all these years later. And that has multi-generational effects to everyone around them. So I would hope that people who read this, that whether they're junior level military leaders that are working their way up the chain, or they're up there right now, or they're an elected representative, that they take a breath and learn from the pages of history and apply those lessons going forward as wisdom, so we don't see a Beirut October 1983 in the future.
Now, Jack, you're talking about there's huge tension throughout the book, and you both did an exceptional job with that. But from a history perspective, I think the job that you did explaining Beirut during this time frame had to be the most difficult part. Parsing it out, making it understandable to somebody who doesn't know this time frame. Like, James, how was it for you when you're planning this out? Because listen, World War II, it's not easy to write about, but there's Nazis and there's good people, and it helps to have that bright red line. Whereas for something like this, there's so much stuff going on. How do you turn it into something readable and understandable for somebody who just picked it up and didn't know anything about it?
Yeah, no, I spent 20 years writing about Japan. So I know who the players are, and I've built up a knowledge base of that. So, it's easy for me when I've got to write scenes, about what happens in World War II in the Pacific. For this, you're right. I mean, getting into the politics of Lebanon in 1983 and all the different domestic groups. I mean, keeping up with who's a Druze, who's a Sunni, who's a Shia, the fight for power. I mean, it was and Jack, I mean, it was just mind numbing. I mean, and we're trying to boil it down to something as simple as we can for readers, and it's a challenge. And I'll tell you, we really struggled chapters 3 and 4 initially. We're like, we packed it all in. We're like, all right. And Jackson was like, what? We just need to cut this sucker in half. And I was like, perfect. Like, it totally worked. I was like, take the scalpel right here. We're going to put a new chapter in. I was like, boom.
Bold adjustments. We call that on a sniper weapon system when you're sighting and you're going to make a bold adjustment. You don't want to do like one click, tink, one more, tink, bold adjustments. Boom. Okay, there we go. Come back home.
But it did, because it was like, what happened in Lebanon in that time period, there's just so many different players, everything's going on, of course, and the Marines get dropped right into this just huge civil war, and it's just local domestic power grab, and the Marines are having to figure it. If we were struggling to figure it out, they're trying to figure it out as well at that point. It's a powder keg, and understanding just the players in and of itself is a college level course.
Oh yeah. It's something I thought about, recently, because we talk about what was happening in the Reagan White House at the time and who was advising what, but to say nothing of all the other elements and countries that are involved in Lebanon and around Lebanon. They have the same thing going on in them. Israel has the same things going on, internal politics in Lebanon, Iran, internal politics there. There are internal politics and relationships and histories with all of these surrounding countries, to say nothing of the different factions within Lebanon itself. So there are so many factors at play here that are like almost mind-numbing.
And Jack, you said it before, that ticking clock early on. There was a tension in the book, especially once you get past, here's what's happening, everybody. But there's also that tension, that ticking clock, because we know what's going to happen. When you're writing stuff like that, like, first of all, I knew that feeling. I remember especially when I was in Iraq and they said, we're leaving in a month. And in your head, you're like, well, now is not the time for something to happen. And there's a specific feeling that goes, and I felt that in the book, where it really felt like these Marines felt like that the whole time. Like, just, we know something's about to happen. Something's going to go down. We don't know what it is. We don't know when it's happening, but we know it's going to happen. Was that what you were kind of aiming for with the way you set this up?
I don't even think I was aiming for it. I think it was just something that was natural. Just like you said, I mean, it's not just your experience in the military. That's most people's experience, is that, we're getting down to that last month. Okay, don't think about it. Don't think about it. These last 2 weeks are going to be the longest. Like the first 2 weeks and the last 2 weeks, kind of the longest. The last 2 weeks feel like it's almost a year. So I think that was a natural part, but I'm curious to hear what James has to say about it. But I mean, they were in that stage, essentially. And for you in Iraq, I wrote this in my first novel, the thriller, because I was there in 2004 in Iraq when, I forget what unit it was, but they went to the airport. At the airport, they had army, so they were there already a year. They got turned around for another 4 months. They were ready to go. They had sent people home to go prep at home, at the duty stations at home, to get ready to accept them when all the other planes started coming in with all the personnel and gear. Those people had to come back, and I think a few of them did not make it after they had to come back and do another 4 months. So I think that's just a very natural thing for any military unit that's deployed, but that certainly was the case here.
Yeah, and I'll add too, you talk about the rising tension. That tension was naturally present. I mean, it's, the guys get there initially and they're building playgrounds and they're doing dental checks for the local orphanages. And very quickly, the situation starts going sideways for them. And, it really begins with the bombing of the American embassy in April. But the Marines arrive right after that. And very quickly, that summer, things start going downhill. They start getting the mortar and artillery shells coming into the airport compound. They suddenly start getting attacked by snipers. The first couple of Marines get killed, and then it just then 3 or 4 more, and then 5 and 6, and so the tension is building, and and it's paralleled by the tension that's going on outside in the community, that they can see, the change around them, and suddenly there's the slums around them are filled with young military-aged males. The women and children are vanishing, and obviously the guys that are fighters and terrorists are moving in. That tension builds naturally in that environment. Like, all we were doing is reporting what the Marines were seeing, what their daily. We're looking at their message traffic. We're looking at their weekly counts. They're seeing all this escalating violence. They're seeing that the situation's getting worse and worse, and really they're doing everything they can at that point and just trying to get to the end of their deployment and get out safely. But you really, though, and you reading those letters and stuff like that, those last few weeks, everybody's it's pins and needles. And then, of course, the bombing happens.
It reads like a horror story, right? Jason is coming out of the lake, and you know how it's going to end, but you're kind of like, maybe something will change. And there's definitely, especially with what you said before, Jack, that you almost want this to be a leadership parable for military leaders now, because it is very clear that perhaps one, if not both of you, felt the rules of engagement around this time was doing no one any favors. Is that a point you really wanted to hit hard when you were writing this book?
I think it's more of how difficult it is to throw a military unit into a situation like this and give them rules of engagement. You always have that inherent right to self-defense type thing, but you're putting Marines who are trained for war into a situation where they're supposed to be peacekeepers, and you keep telling them they're peacekeepers. They had you can't fire back saloon, like all that stuff. They were very aware of these rules of engagement, and they were very aware that they were put in this position that was not a normal, quote unquote, normal position for Marines to be in particular. So yeah, the rules of engagement are certainly something that senior level leaders need to be aware of when they're throwing these Marines essentially into a powder keg. But we saw the same thing in Iraq and Afghanistan. We weren't there as peacekeepers essentially. So it was a different deal, and we didn't do these guys in Beirut any favors. But then again, if you're putting them in to keep the peace, very soon after the first shot's fired, the Marines are not going to do a good job at keeping the peace. They're going to crush whoever they're supposed to crush and come home. That's the job of the Marine Corps.
Yeah, and there's a great quote that Colonel Garrity, who was commander of all the Marines, said. He's like, the situation changed, but no one changed the situation.
I love that one. Exactly.
It's perfect. And there's a disconnect between what the Marines are experiencing on the ground and how Washington see it. And there's a huge lag. And granted, it's 5,000-6,000 miles away, but as the situation's getting worse, the sort of the stalemate in Washington and the lack of appreciation for how fast events are moving on the ground in Beirut becomes a huge handicap that's ultimately going to become the Achilles heel for these Marines. And that's what Garrity's saying. He's like, he's there with 1,800 Marines, right? If America truly was going in there as a stabilizing peacekeeping force in civil war, you need much, much more than that. Several of the guys, were quoted saying you need a division, maybe even 2, if you really wanted to have a huge force. 1,800 Marines is there, they're just too small to do anything other than be a small, a presence. They're not actually there to be fighting. And as the situation's getting worse and worse, Washington's not getting that. And of course, at that point, then Washington sort of breaks down in this huge fight over the War Powers Act. And so, are the Marines actually in combat? Are they not? And they're being shot at, but are they the actual direct recipients of gunfire, or is it that they're just bystanders of gunfire? And so, the administration gets caught up in this fight with Congress, and they're having their own political battle in Washington. And meanwhile, the Marines are over here going, whoa, wait about it. You need to understand the situation we're in. And it's crazy how the domestic politics in the U.S. creates this huge handicap that ultimately comes back and haunts these guys on the ground in Beirut.
Another thing I realized was that between April and October, because of course I'm aware of what happened in April with the embassy bombing, I'm aware of what happens in October with the Beirut and headquarters building bombing. What I wasn't as aware of when we started this was what happens between April and October. And in talking to these guys, they were most certainly in combat.
Yeah.
There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. They were in combat. The talking points from the administration, of course, are these are peacekeepers. As James just articulated, there was all sorts of debate about direct fire, indirect fire. These guys were in combat between April and October as things escalate and we start ticking down towards October 23rd. But yeah, no doubt about it. That part was very eye-opening for me.
Your voice as authors come through, like your frustration. I don't have the line right in front of me, but basically you have a one-liner that just says, these orders make no sense. And just, I felt that's just their own frustration writing about this, seeing how it's going to go down, knowing how it ends, and thinking, for God's sake, somebody's got to use some common sense here, right?
I thought you were going to say it could have come from any book about Iraq or Afghanistan.
Different podcast, Jack. Different podcast altogether.
Parallels.
We could probably beat up on a lot of the politics here, but what I really liked, and I want to stay away from the politics side as much as I can, because you make Ronald Reagan a real human here. Like, he's the president, and there's a lot of baggage that comes along with Ronald Reagan. Some love it, some hate it. That's whatever. What you bring forth is that human side, that he's making these decisions, and as a person, he has to live with it, and he really struggles with it. Was that something that you knew about ahead of time? Was this something that you just kind of uncovered as you're going through this?
No, look, I mean, I never really dug into Reagan and much beyond just, living through events and things like that. So, I mean, when we were
that time when you corresponded with him in the early 80s.
beyond our pen pal era and my elementary school years. So, but the thing about Reagan is he has a tremendous heart, and it comes across. I mean, the families that he felt the debt loss of these men so personally. In fact, actually, Jack was corresponding with Reagan's son. You can tell him about what Michael Reagan was telling you about this.
Yeah, he said that it's haunted his father till the day he died. So it's something that Michael Reagan was very aware of over all these years. But same thing as James dug this out of the archives and really put together a portrait of Reagan that I haven't really seen before. And what I didn't know until you dug it out of the archives was that he didn't really like conflict in these meetings in the White House. I wasn't really aware of that beforehand. And I think maybe a little bit of inter-team controversy and fighting in front of the boss might have been beneficial in this situation during this time period. From the outside looking in, with what I know about Reagan, I didn't realize that. Because I've really never thought about it before, which is why it kind of came as a bit of a surprise. Because you assume from the outside looking in that the best idea rises to the top, and you're surrounding yourself with people that you trust to tell you the truth and also give you their best assessments based off their experience and their analysis. And sometimes he didn't get that, and some of that was because he didn't like that conflict.
All right, I'm going to ask you both, but I'm going to start with this one. James, if I could magically get you an interview with anybody from the book that you couldn't talk to, who would it be?
I don't know. There's so many. I mean, so many of the survivors who died, whose letters we read. I would love. I'll give you an example. I mean, I was actually just corresponding earlier today with the son of John Hudson, who's the doctor who was killed in that, and his family gave us access to 600 pages of his letters, and I mean, these are just incredibly moving letters, and as a result of that, he ends up becoming a very central character in the book. And I was writing to his son earlier, and I was just saying, I feel like I know your dad. I mean, I listened to the cassette recordings he made that he mailed back. I read his letters. Like, I had his voice in my head going through them all. And Jack and I are sharing these things back and forth because he was an older guy. He was a Navy doctor, and he was older. He was close to 30, and he had a different perspective on life. He was married, had a son. He wasn't hard charging, so he saw things differently, and he was so articulate about it. And of course, he sadly was killed. But I felt like he's one I would love to have had a beer with and talked about that. And of course, in the Reagan, I'd love to have talked to some of the guys like Caspar Weinberger and Schultz, and even get even more of the nitty gritty of what Jack was talking about like that infighting and how that paralyzed the decision-making process at a very pivotal point when lives could have been saved.
And Jack, I asked James first because I knew he'd list off at least 5 people, so that would give you some ideas. Same people, or do you have somebody else that you'd love to interview?
I said I knew who he was going to pick, Dr. John Hudson, just because he does become so central to this book. And I think I I have the same person just because I want him to survive so bad. And I want him to be a father to his son and a husband to his wife. And so for me, that it would be him.
All right, now, James, I'm going to ask you a question. Jack, you're not going to be allowed to answer this one because I have a different one for you. All right?
All right.
James.
My favorite color is blue. All right, you got it.
Somebody closes this book, James. What do you want them to take away from this, right? You want them to learn the history, but what do you want them to take away from it once they've closed this cover?
You know what I'd love? I mean, I really think one of the things that so many of these guys that we talk to really feel like is that the story of what happened here, that the Marine Corps kind of was quick to move on. And, they, at the higher levels, they felt like it was an embarrassment and they kind of wanted to move on. And quite frankly, Jack and I don't see it that way. I mean, I really look at what happened in Beirut. It's a absolute tragedy, but it's also one of the greatest rescue stories. I mean, when these guys are hit, the way they spring into action, I mean, one of the guys we talked to, Brad Healy, literally dug at that rubble so long that he still has scars on the tips of his fingers from where he dug them raw, literally almost down to the bone to pull these guys out. And I think in the Marine Corps' effort to kind of move past this, they neglected that there is a real amazing story here of what these brothers in arms did for each other as soon as that bomb went off. And I think that's the positive element of it that I think we try to emphasize. I think it's really, for me, so emblematic of this story and of these men. And I hope people take that away from that. And I hope people give them their due. These guys were there at the front lines of a war nobody realized we were on until that bomb went off that morning. And it's defined the next 40 years. And I hope people look back and say, all right, these guys were the terrorism pioneers who paid the ultimate price and who managed to turn this into an incredible story of rescue.
Now, Jack, your question is a little bit different because James has already had the chance to answer this on the other two podcasts he's been on. But we found a History Nerds United because a lot of people are like, nonfiction's boring. History especially is boring, right? But you were the author of the Terminal List, right? So somebody who reads the Terminal List and says, well, that was awesome, that was fiction, but Jack's now doing nonfiction. If I sat one of those people in front of you and they said, but why should I read Targeted Beirut? What would you say to them?
We have a responsibility as citizens to understand our history so we can make better decisions going forward as wisdom. And there are leadership lessons in this book. I weave leadership lessons into the thrillers as well. I weave a lot of history in there as well. But as citizens, it's our responsibility to read. And I think it was General Mattis who said there's no difference between someone who can't read and someone who doesn't read. But really, reading is the foundation for all else. Back in the military, I wanted to be a better leader and operator today than I was yesterday. I want to be a better author today than I was yesterday. I want my next book to be better than this book. I want our next in the series here to be better than this one because of things that we learned throughout this process. I want to be a better husband today than I was yesterday, a better father today than I was yesterday. So I'd say it's our responsibility to read because of so much that was sacrificed for us from the inception of this country up until today. And the decisions we make today, whether they're within our family, whether they're within whatever sphere of influence that we have, or if we're making larger decisions that are going to impact a great number of people, essentially at a strategic level, it's our responsibility to understand history, draw lessons from it, the correct lessons from it, so we can apply those going forward as wisdom. That's what we owe the people to our right and left, if we're down at that tactical operational level, and that's what we owe the families of everyone who's going to be affected by these decisions. So it all comes back to reading and building this foundation, and to say nothing of being a good example for others around us, like our kids. So I would say it's our responsibility. So read up.
Well, speaking of which, James and Jack, what's next? What should we be looking for next from either each of you or both of you together? What am I reading next is my question here, people.
Oh, there is something. It hasn't been announced yet. So stand by is what I would say. James has another book, though, that he's working on right now. That he's
hustling to get it done so we can get back on our next project. So
that's right.
We got plenty to get ready for. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on. The book's fantastic. It's important. I really appreciate you chatting about it.
Brendan, thanks so much.
Really appreciate it. Take care.
And that's it for this episode. James, Jack, thank you so much both for coming on. Targeted Beirut, great book, important book. Go out and get it, people. Hit us up Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Don't forget the YouTube channel. Until next time, nerds, stay cool.
History Nerds United.